Session overview. Setting learners up for success, working alongside to support learners, basic tool adaptations, building fine motor skills, and process over product. There are many benefits for adapting art. Successful art making builds your child's confidence. Techniques encourage essential developmental skills. Making a few simple adaptations can give your child a more successful and meaningful art experience. For students with special needs, art can be their main form of communication and self-expression. Learning coaches, here are some tips for success. Create a comfortable workplace. Ensure the chair is at the correct height. Put all art supplies nearby and be ready. Ask for lessons in advance so that you can make tracers, find objects for your child to trace, or use as they create art. Model step-by-step instructions and techniques and chunk information. Do not do the work for your child, rather model how to alongside them. Hi, I'm Bette Naughton. I hope these adaptations I show you will enable your child to be more successful while creating art remotely. So these are some things you can do at home to help your child be more successful in art. If they can't freehand draw, say you had to do an ocean scene and they needed to draw a fish or maybe a turtle and some water, if they can't freehand draw that, you could always cut a tracer out for them. You can do these out of boxes from cereal and then just have them put it down and tell them to use their helper hand and to trace around it and to bump that edge. Otherwise, they'll come out and go around it really big. So just encouraging bumping the edge, talking to them as they go, reminding them to keep bumping the edge. And if they go off it, it's fine. Just they can go back and fix it. Another thing to use would be to use found objects. So maybe some cookie cutter shapes for a lesson. Or if the lesson's about abstract art, they can hold and trace different shapes and overlap shapes if they can't draw them independently. If you need to offer a couple different choices, that's good because even though students may not be able to freely draw their own shape, giving them a choice that you want this or that, and then they could figure out which one they wanted to use if they were creating something like a still life. I realize not everyone is talented at making their own tracers, so if you need to, you could always print things off the internet and turn them into tracers. So there's some really simple, look for something like a simple coloring book page that you could cut out the shape or enlarge it if you had to, and then you could cut that out of cardboard for your child. Another great thing is if they're doing something like a city or a little community, to give them a bag of tracers that would help with things like building a town. So this, they could actually decide which way they wanted things to go, and they're engaged in the art making. They're making those decisions that they want it here. Do they want this house further back? And then work with tracing each one. Once they set up their things, just work on one at a time. So making things out of cereal boxes, like I said, or cardboard boxes, oak tag, are a great way to encourage your child to have a more successful art experience. When you're painting, sometimes I'll give them something like this where you cut out the tracer out of oak tag, but for them to be successful and not, if you draw it this way, they might paint over it. So sometimes I will give them this where they actually paint inside it. And we'll go through different adaptations to brushes and things. So let's first talk about pencils. Depending on the group your child has, they might be able to hold a pencil like this, but if they're holding it like this and having a hard time drawing, sometimes giving a smaller pencil, it's harder to hold like that. It almost forces that correct finger posture for them, which is holding it with the pinchers, which builds up your fine motor skills in your child's hand. Scissors are another thing that we can adapt. If they're having a hard time with scissors like this because they don't have a strong grip in their hand, there are a variety of adapted scissors you can purchase. There's ones that have the Mr. Pointer finger to help hold it. There are ones that are what we call spring-loaded. So when they're spring-loaded, they're just squeezing with their hand. and you would still need to guide them. If your child has a low vision issue, you might need to make this line thicker because it's hard to see pencil lines. So sometimes for students that have low vision, I might come in and make this a bolder line, and I would only outline the part that would need to be cut out. Otherwise, they'll cut the tree in half. So this is another suggestion if your child has low vision. Bold lines are easier to see than fine lines, and they're certainly easier to see than a pencil line. You can see the difference in that. This is another type of scissor. Uses the hand to make the scissors open and shut. And you can just push along. That said, scissors require fine motor skills, and one of the best ways to increase your child's fine motor skills are to practice paper tearing, and not just grabbing it this way and ripping it in half, because that's using the strength of the arms, but to develop these pinchers. So I recommend a pinch, pinch, and then pull. Pinch, pinch, pull, pinch, pinch, pull. And if they can't paint within the lines, say you're drawing something like a heart and they trace the tracer, teachers will be fine as long as, if you're coloring with something. So whether you wanted to glue down pieces of paper that were torn and make a mosaic, as long as it's color, I'm sure your child's teacher won't mind. So paper tearing is a great exercise. So let's talk about ways to change pencils. So if a student has a light grip, like what I call featherweight, they can't press real hard. So there's some alternatives out there of pencils that go on a little slicker. They roll out, they're a little wider. You could go for a wider crayon as opposed to a thin crayon. Sometimes when we get that same hole going this way on the crayon, so I recommend breaking your crayons in half and getting small pieces which force that pincher grip. And sometimes they're easier to use for little hands. Painting can be another area of concern. So if we're painting something like a heart, and the child's art teacher asks to use watercolors, if your child has a cognitive impairment and you tell them to paint red and they know the color red, but sometimes just their aim is off, you can always put like a little piece of paper across it just to isolate red, to reinforce that that is red. So I always like to, if they drew lightly in pencil, I always like to either hand over hand with the child or give them a outline, so to tell them to kind of contain it. So sometimes you might have to be a little bit of a helper and then tell them to paint within it. So stay in here, not out here. And then that can kind of give them a guide, because that fine motor edge, a lot of kids, if this is the edge, they'll try pushing the paint up to it and end up with something like this, or they'll go past it. So actually either hand over hand, which is just holding their hand and going around, getting that shape and let them feel that shape that a heart makes, and then they could fill it in. If a regular paintbrush isn't working, there are things like what's called an egg-handled brush. It's a little bit big for the watercolors, but they can either hold it this way, because a lot of children have what we call a doorknob grasp, or you can hold it a little bit further down. And there also are something called shaving cream brushes available online that give you a little bit more control. And you have to consider your child. If your child is better working large, then I suggest that you would have them draw large. I mean, the teacher might say it could be like a 9x12 paper, but if it's your student is better working large, if their fine and gross motor skills have a harder time when something's small and delicate, then go ahead and enlarge that. Another way to paint would be either using tempera paint, but I wouldn't give it in a little bottle like this. I would actually pour it like in a little bowl or disposable paper plate, so that they had an easier time navigating putting the brush in and out. And then these are paints that actually come kind of like a glue stick. that you can just fill in this way. So this is very smooth, goes on smooth and then dries after a bit. So those are some basic things you can do to help your students at home. One more thing is if your students have low vision, a lot of times it's best to give them bright fluorescent colors. So they could work with bright fluorescent colors. A strong black outline helps, and then using bright colors of paint are easier to see than dark colors. Patterns are another thing. Say their teacher says, well, the kids have to draw a still life, and you're thinking, all right, well, they have a tracer for a vase here, and then the teacher wants the vase to be colored in and some kind of pattern in the background. Well, if your child does not have the ability to draw hearts and stripes for a background or a checkered tablecloth, then you need to think a little bit outside the box. So you could have them make a background by peeling stickers and putting them on. That makes a beautiful pattern. And guess what? It works great fine motor skills. So they could just peel off some stickers and put them on the background. You could get some of the scrapbooking papers and have them put that down first and collage your still life with them. Or you could even use the peel stickers, what I call them. They're like foam stickers. You get them at the craft stores and just peel that off, and they could have a little more of a three-dimensional look to it. One other option would be to go around the house and maybe have a brick on the outside or even the bottom of tennis shoes, make cool patterns, and have your child put something that's a pattern on it. Look for textures, and then take the crayon and hold it with your pinchers on the side. This is a pattern plate, and they could make a pattern that way. So think of those things when you're having your child do their assignments. When it comes to gluing things down, if we're gluing something to a piece of paper, it's always easier for them to see where they're putting the glue if you use the purple glue. So have them put some glue on the piece. A lot of times they'll want to glue the whole background and just stick a few pieces, but that gets kind of messy. This also encourages using those pinchers and then place it down. So this is a great, easier for them to see where the glue is on this than it is with just the plain clear glue. For your students that have sensory, or your children have sensory concerns, giving them things like a sponge to paint with can be a more sensory experience. Some markers come in smells. Students in my class love these smelly markers. You could also put a little bit of vanilla essential oils or some lavender in paints to send them for like a calming experience. When you're making patterns, like I showed you for the background, you can also dip or paint on an eraser or cork to make patterns that way. So use your creative thinking and think, all right, my child has to do something with patterns. What do I have laying around the house? A toilet paper tube that I can squish the end of, a brick wall, a textured surface, stickers, and it doesn't matter so much about the product, it's more about the process with art making. I hope you've enjoyed these tips.